So we really are unpacking all this new legislation that's coming in from parliamentary levels, and the one we're talking now is about the debt relief bill. So this wants the legislation, groups supporting this bill want the legislation published and implemented as soon as possible. President Cyril Ramaphosa last week signed the National Credit Amendment Bill into law. So in a nutshell, it will enable consumers who earn less than 7,500 Rand to apply for their debts of up to 50,000 Rand to be scrapped altogether. The banking industry, of course, has opposed this bill, saying it'll restrict the ability of banks to lend to this market and increase the cost of credit. To discuss this further, in our parliamentary studios, we've got Matthew Parks. He, of course, is COSATU's Parliamentary Co-ordinator. Matthew, great to have you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And here in the Johannesburg studio, we've got Abba Omar, who is the Senior General Manager of Strategy and Communications at the Banking Association of South Africa. Abba, thank you. Good to see you again.
Good to be here.
All right. So, Matthew, let's begin with you in Cape Town. You've always supported this bill. What is your reaction to the argument by other groups who don't support this legislation, particularly with what the DA and the banking industry are saying about it?
Look, we're quite disappointed by what the DA and the Banking Association have been saying. They really have the heart of a cold stone. This bill is not as dramatic as they have been misrepresenting it as. Basically, it seeks to build upon the existing debt relief mechanisms already provided for in the law. It's not a guaranteed write-off of debt of less than 50,000, but it allows consumers who earn less than 7,500 a month or who are unemployed, who are battling to meet ends, to apply for some sort of debt relief. They could, for example, apply for the debt to be paid over a 5-year period. They could apply for a 1 or 2 year debt holiday. They could request that the interest rate be reviewed and possibly be reduced. All of those are first attempts to see how can they make it more affordable for them, while at the same time honoring their contractual obligations. Only in certain circumstances at the end would they look at expunging debt, and that would look at, for example, are they a victim of criminal or reckless lending, or have they paid sufficient amounts of debt and they could be written off. So it's not a blank check. Ironically, Leanne, at Parliament during the extensive public hearings on the bill, all the banks said they already provide such mechanisms of debt relief. So not sure why then are they so afraid to simply put what they promised to do in law. In 2017, the banks said they wrote off about 34 billion Rand of debt or gave some sort of debt relief to that effect. Here, it's estimated that it'll be actually about a quarter of that amount. So again, it's a bit hypocritical for the banks to say, well, don't hold us accountable. The same banks, Leanne, on average pay the average worker about 300 Rand a day. Yet the CEOs on average make about 150,000 Rand a day. They posted billions of rands of profits in the annual performances. At the same time, they've been retrenching thousands of workers. So really, the banks need to come to the party. The Reserve Bank's latest reports to Parliament show that most South Africans, especially the poor, are struggling to make ends meet. We think this is it's a balanced build upon the existing debt relief mechanisms. It will help the poor. And right now, it's actually better to help the poor pay a more affordable amount than simply just squeeze them into poverty.
Yeah. All right. Matthew, thanks. I think a good way to start this discussion and some great points raised there. But this is where you come in, and that's why we have you here from the Banking Association. I mean, from what Matthew's saying, it almost doesn't make sense that the banks are opposing this if the numbers are to be believed. But right. Let's get your view.
Let me start by saying we don't have a heart of stone, and that we obviously, it is because of our concern of the way consumers would be behaving and in direction they would go once this bill comes into effect. Now, Matthews has already done me a good job by indicating the role banks have played already in the expansion of debts in the past. We have been involved with the bill even in its previous incarnation. So from 2015 onwards, there were amendments being made. We supported it. We haven't been opposed to everything that the legislators have been coming up with or that government has passed. We have been there, we've been involved. And when this amendment came about, we were seriously concerned. Firstly, it came up not through the normal route through the executive. It came up through a committee way. And I think that's why COSATU goes to its extent of supporting and saluting the committee chair, etc. The problem with that is that once you don't involve experts from your bureaucracy, from the department, you're going to immediately be having a flawed legislation. Secondly, there has been no impact study of what consequences we're looking at in terms of this bill. There was a belated attempt by the Department of Trade and Industry to have a socio-economic impact study done, but we haven't even been allowed to see that, and that happened in the beginning of this year before the election. So we believe that the haste in which the bill was produced and passed through Parliament was really a populist tactic leading up to the elections. Who's the stone-hearted people here? Because we've been expunging, the banks have been expunging debt. We've been saying, look, there's been a number of mechanisms that came into effect in 2015, and we've seen that these mechanisms have been really effective in making sure that people do not get into debt unnecessarily or without understanding the consequences. We've had a debt review mechanism that has come in, and that has also been helping people. Our argument has been the 7,500 figure is such a thumbsuck. Where does it come from? It's not even the national minimum wage that COSATU signed up with. Yeah. It gives powers to the minister, it gives power to right down to magistrates to decide whether they should expunge debt. So who's going to suffer at the end? It's the very people that are at the bottom end who desperately do require credit, who do pay the amounts, but who then banks are scared to extend credit to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those people are not COSATU's membership. COSATU's membership are those in the much higher pay ranks and pay salary scales. And therefore, I'm sure COSATU is not worried about the consequences for them.
Yeah. I mean, Matthew, let's bring you back into this conversation, because this is a valid point that has been brought up. I mean, many are speaking to the fact that this 7,500 rand income per month is a bit of a thumbsuck, and it does eliminate a lot of people who are in debt. So how do you actually go about deciding who deserves it and who doesn't deserve it?
Sure, look, if the Banking Association is supporting increasing the 7,500 rand a month qualification criteria to the original 10,000, we'll be happy to support them. But look, there was part of compromises in Parliament. The original amount was actually 10,000 rand a month, but as part of the compromises Parliament made with stakeholders in response to the banks, pleading of poverty, etc., they reduced the amount. I think BAS is being more than disingenuous to say this is a rush process. This bill sat at Parliament for more than 3 years. And look, in a democracy, there are elections all the time. Every 2.5 years there's elections in South Africa. The fact that this bill is actually coming into effect after elections shows you that BAS's crying political foul is actually devoid of fact. Also, the attack by BASA to say, look, COSATU members are rich, it's again, untruthful. Most workers support about 7 unemployed persons, so we're all in this game together. As COSATU, we don't want to see the banks collapse. We need the banks to grow the economy. We've got members who work in the banks who make 300 rand a day, whilst the CEOs make 150,000 rand a day. But the banks also need to start being honest with themselves and engage in some serious patriotic self-introspection. The economy is struggling to grow right now. We are charging, the poorer you are, the higher the interest rate the banks charge you, because they view you as risky. Ironically, it should be the opposite. The poorer you are, the lower the interest rate you are charged should be, so that you're able to afford it. Right now, we're squeezing workers into the ground, expect them to pay these loans. We really need actually to reduce the interest rates, make loans more affordable, so the banks can get their loans paid back, but workers can survive. Workers will have more disposable income, which they can spend in the economy. That will help to increase demand, to increase production, to increase jobs.
Yeah.
It would really be helpful if the banks could have said to us, what is unconstitutional about this bill? They haven't been able to say that. In fact, Leon, if the bill was unconstitutional, as they've been crying, they would have long gone to the Constitutional Court. The fact that they haven't shows you that they know they're just engaging in political grandstanding, and they're not actually helping address this issue. The interesting thing, Leanne, also is that during the parliamentary public hearings, of which there was about 20 on this particular bill, far more than the average norm for a bill, some of the banks actually said they actually don't have a problem with the bill. Banks like Capitec, Nedbank and Absa, to varying degrees, said actually they don't have a problem with the objectives and many of the provisions of the bill. I think the other thing which was kind of being left out, Leanne, on the bill, which actually is going to benefit the banks, is that it criminalizes the illegal loan sharks, the mashonisas. Often those guys really charge horrendous rates of exploitation to lenders, 100%, etc. So those mashonisas can now actually be sent to prison. This is a useful thing the Parliament has done to drive people to actually go towards the legal lenders, the mainstream banks who charge lower interest rates. So this actually is going to increase the pool for the banks. The other thing, lastly, that it does, Leanne, is that when the sheriffs come and repossess your property, it protects some essential household goods like your beds, your children's school uniforms, kitchen appliances, etc., to try to afford some minimum dignity and protection to those families. And again, it would be nice for the banks to actually come out and support such progressive, humane gestures.
I just have to, I'll just quiz you on this, because just one or two things, Matthew. When you said that this will help the banks, it will help the banks because it's going to almost give them license to not loan anything to you, because you're almost going to look at this person and say, well, you know, we've written off your debt, we're not even going to even attempt to loan to you again, so that's going to be a write-off. Then the loan sharks who prey on these very people that we're trying to protect will be there because they are desperate, need more money, and they, of course, will still be operating illegally, even though there is the sentence hanging over their heads. But this may make this sector even more vulnerable. Is that not a little bit of a worry to you, that as desperate as people may be, this may even make them more desperate?
Look, people are desperate already, as you've seen from the reports. The system right now is not working. People are breaking, they're on the collapse. People are defaulting, their levels of defaulting are increasing. This is one intervention to help resolve the problem. The real solution is actually for the banks to lower the interest rates. It is also for government to crack down on the illegal loan sharks who are operating in open daylight, to close them down, to shut them down. So it's a multi-pronged approach. The banks have to play their part. This bill is not going to solve all the issues, but it's a step in a progressive, humane direction.
Okay. Abba, let's talk about this, because it's a very, very complex situation, and there are both sides to the story. But you know, we look at banks, which are businesses. They are operating in the way they are, but you know, is this a reality that you may see banks saying, we're not lending to you, you already owe us X amount, it's over now?
It's interesting that Matthew Parks talks about the hearings. I wish he had joined me at some of those hearings, because I personally attended a lot of those public hearings, because the banks wanted to make sure that we spoke to the provincial legislatures as well about the problems of this, of what was in the legislation. Secondly, you know, you can't take something to court unless the legislation is passed. So that's, again, rich coming from him. Why didn't we go to the Constitutional Court already? We will look at our options now. Thirdly, the point you're making about Capitec, perhaps you haven't had a chance to read Business Day's headline this morning, Mr. Parks, but have a look. They're already saying that they're going to be cutting back on those very categories that are exposed. So our point is that, you know, we had mechanisms that were in place that were working. This point about, I don't know where he says, you know, there's increase in the number of defaults. Those mechanisms were working. We were reducing the number of people that were falling into default because we were intervening earlier. We were providing debt counseling earlier. Another challenge that we had indicated to the committee that was not being included in the legislation was that people talk only about the unsecured credit that the banks extend, but they don't talk about the municipal debts, the school fees debts, etc. Those are debts that the banks have no say over, and that's you know, that is in the hands of private lawyers that go after the people that are in debt. So, Leanne, the key point, you know, that when you say banks are a business, banks deal with your money. It deals with the money of COSATU members. It deals with the money of businesses. They deposit the money. That money is then lent out to people. So that's your money that is being lent out. You obviously want to make sure that money comes back, that money is secure. When you need it, you want it. You don't want the bank to be going down because suddenly there are millions of people that that are not paying back the debt. And interestingly, in this statement, COSATU is already making an appeal to the workers not to go out and get into debt, which indicates they know that this is not even an unintended, it is a clearly warned consequence of this piece of legislation.
Let's talk of those consequences in terms of the country, because I've been reading different analysis around the fact that this again could have a big impact on our ratings, and ratings agencies may look to this. This could have serious economic implications for the country, for banks, for businesses, for individuals. What would the repercussions be of something like this?
Right. I think the one repercussion already, as I said today, is with banks being, and you indicated that also, that banks will be even more conservative. They're generally conservative because they're dealing with other people's money. They have to look after the money. They have to make sure the money comes back. So that's the first thing. Poor people are going to suffer even more. The second thing is that the perception of how the entire finance system is structured then becomes even further negative, because people are going to say, this is going to encourage reckless lending, going for lending through other mechanisms, the informal lending that I'm referring to, the loan sharks, which is very unfortunate. So you'll take the whole economy, so the level of debt at the household level starts increasing. And this is what people start considering. Do we have the money to grow the economy? Is the money going into the right places? Is it going to productive purposes? And that's when people start saying this country is at risk, especially the financial system is at risk.
Okay. Matthew, from your side, just to get sort of closing comments as well, there is a big argument that we as a nation are exceptionally state dependent, that we should be looking at other mechanisms like more job creation by empowering the citizens of the country, and education opportunities, as opposed to writing off debt and saying, okay, well, it's fine, don't worry about that, let's move on. You know, these are some of the other issues that can be dealt with. Let's get your closing remarks and perhaps touch on that as well.
Sure. Look, obviously the solution to all our problems as a nation, socially, economically, is the issue of unemployment. We need to create jobs. If we can create jobs, people can sort themselves out. They can protect their families, etc. They can pay off their loans. So we do need to see a bit more action by government and by the private sector to implement the agreements they made at the Jobs Summit in October last year. It's been extremely slow, and we've been bleeding jobs across the economy. And also many of the promises businesses made there have not borne fruition. But we are pleased that we had a recent meeting with the President and business at NEDLAC a few weeks ago, where we've established a kind of a mini war room, so to speak, where the President will be meeting with business and labour the first Monday of every month to look at the implementation plan around the Job Summit commitments, because we really are in the boat together as a nation, government, labour, business community. We have to get things moving, because right now the system is breaking. For us, this was a useful credit relief bill, which gives a bit of hope to those who are not even making the end of the month end, those who are most poor, most vulnerable, who do need a helping hand.
Okay.
We are happy that the bank said they're going to have some debt relief for the poor. But look, as COSATU, we don't want to rely upon promises and friendship. We want to see those kind of things being provided for in law, which this one does.
All right.
Of course, Leanne, I think also on the debt issue, the real solution also is for the banks to make their products more affordable so people are not forced to go to the loan sharks.
Okay. Matthew, we have to leave it there, but I thank both of you for your time, and of course we'll get into more depth with the next step in the process.
Thank you for the
Matthew
opportunity.
Parks, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming. And Matthew Parks, COSATU's Parliamentary Co-ordinator, and Abba Omar, who's the Senior General Manager of Strategy and Communications at the Banking Association of South Africa. Let's take a break. We'll see you with the news after this.